And hi, and it's Monday evening, so of course it's Red Line TV. Now, it's been a very strange time for us all on Red Line TV, apart from the fact that we've come back from a Christmas break and a New Year's break and what's happening to politics generally. We're having a bit of a sort of relaunch. We've got a new format, we've got new items that are coming in, and we've also got a bit of a restructured team. Tina Workman has left us, but we're really pleased to have had a couple of people who've come in to do that bolstering up of how we deal with things in the programme. And they've had to take on all sorts of systems that they didn't institute themselves, and they've adapted to it really well, but there may be some glitches. So I'm really hoping you'll be patient with us, because I think we have a really good lineup of show and we've got some good plans for the future. On top of that, some of you may know that Graham hasn't been well. In fact, we've only been back from the hospital about an hour or so. So, you know, here we are, we're still doing it. It's still important, but please be patient. If you see Graham grimacing, it has nothing to do with the politics and everything to do with his condition. Mike.
Indeed, and Jackie, let's be honest, comrades always respond effectively when we're under duress and under pressure. This evening, let me summarise the show for your viewing and listening pleasure. That vexed question, comrades, is the party over? Can the party be saved? For socialist politics and class politics, we've got some fantastic speakers. Jackie mentioned Graham, ex-Labour briefing editor and of this parish, Red Line TV. Alan Simpson, ex-Labour MP, ex-Socialist Campaign Group, and still fighting the good fight, and particularly trying to merge that struggle between class and between climate crisis. They're going to be talking initially and delivering their separate contributions. We'll then move to Ian Hodson from the Bakers Union. Delighted to have Ian here. And Audrey White. You may remember Audrey, a particular, shall we say, exchange between her and brother Starmer went viral for a period of time. And Audrey is from that most wonderful republic, the good Republic of Liverpool. I visited many times with my partner, had fantastic evenings down there. And they're going to be discussing their point of view about whether the party can be saved, and whether indeed, which I guess is a vexed question, is it worth saving? We're then going to move on, comrades, to invite Graham and Alan back to discuss what has been discussed thus far and make their responses to those discussions. Once we've done that, and of course we'll welcome all your contributions and comments in the chat box, we'll move on to a couple of new sections which we are piloting tonight and introducing tonight. The first one, Our History and Theirs, where we contrast how events from the past or figures from the past have been framed and discussed, and compare that to what we actually know about those events and those figures from contemporary left historians, good journalists, and so on. We'll then move on to another new section, Stop Press, where we look at the less reported stories of the day of relevance to society more broadly, but to socialists and the left in particular, stories that have perhaps crept under the radar and not been widely discussed and reported. And we have a couple of stories for you tonight. And lastly, to close us off, Jackie will return and say one or two words about Red Line TV in the future. So before, without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Brother Bash, who fresh from the hospital, but full of vigour, full of ideas as always, and his contribution on the future of the Labour Party, should it have a future. Over to you, Graham.
Thanks, Mike, and hello to Alan, Ian, Audrey, and all the comrades here this evening. Now, anyone tuning in expecting some easy, immediate answers, well, you're all going to be disappointed, because it's not so easy. My starting point is the same as it always is: class struggle, building the resistance, climate change protest, anti-racism, the fight for equalities, Palestinian rights, anti-imperialism, above all, the fight for socialism, the only way our planet can survive. So what on earth has any of this to do with the Labour Party? At this stage, I have to say, not very much. The motor force for change will not come primarily from within constituency Labour parties, now less than ever. The Labour Party has always been a bureaucratised expression of class struggle. It was born that way. Its creation was a conquest for the workers' movement, but deformed from the very outset. It was born a class compromise as a contradiction in class terms, based on the separation of trade unionism from parliamentary politics, a refusal to countenance the use of the industrial power of trade unions and the working class to advance the political aims of the Labour Party. This class compromise we can call Labourism. So is what we face today with the Starmer counter-revolution after the hope of the Corbyn years, is it just a continuation of Labourism, or is it a final break, the end of the road, into Labour's transformation into simply and only an establishment party? Now, there's no simple yes or no to that. Yes, we can all point to the anti-working class, anti-socialist politics of Starmer, his refusal to back workers fighting to defend living standards, terms and conditions, his refusal to commit to repealing anti-trade union legislation. But we've seen it before. I'm getting on, I know, but I remember Harold Wilson's attacks on trade unions and in place of strife in the late 60s, Callaghan's attacks on in the 1979 winter of discontent that brought Thatcher to power, Blair's attacks on firefighters and so many others. And before this, before my time even, take a look at the role of Attlee's government from 45 to 51. Much vaunted and overpraised, in my opinion, sending troops in during the Dockers strike, and on 18 different occasions, I understand, sending troops, sometimes up to 20,000 across picket lines to take over strikers' jobs. So it's not new. Starmer, a direct representative of imperialism, of course, but any more than Attlee's government was, or Blair's decision to support the US invasion of Iraq. Just remember, 12 years after that historic decision, Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party. So, am I arguing that this is just business as usual? And like some of the Labour left still do, arguing to keep our heads down and wait for our turn to come again? No, I don't. It is different today for two reasons. Firstly, unlike even in the Blair days, there's far less scope for even the limited reforms and public expenditure increases under Blair. And secondly, with Corbyn as leader, the establishment faction of the Labour Party, that's the Labour Party bureaucracy and the majority of the PLP, they had the fright of their lives. They're determined never to let it happen again. That is the reason for the scale of the witch hunt, for the attacks on free speech, for the imposition of candidates, for the crushing and lockout of the left, for the contempt shown to the trade union movement. So these are the questions. Can the Labour Party be saved as a party in any way expressing the interests of the Labour movement, however indirect and bureaucratised? Possibly, but probably not. Can the left ever regain even the semblance of power within Labour? Well, I doubt it. But that doesn't quite answer the question. Even if we arrive at the conclusion that Labourism has run its historical course, that all that exists will at some point die, that an alternative to Labour must be built, and that is the most likely conclusion, in my opinion, even then we face another question. From where will that alternative be built? And my answer is from within the Labour Party and the trade unions themselves primarily. Labour has many, many more socialists, even now, within the party than all the socialist groups put together. And it is the only party with the affiliation of most of the major trade unions. And apart from the Bakers Union, wonderful to have Ian here today, there has so far been no serious moves to disaffiliate certainly nothing to suggest a meaningful attempt at founding a mass party of Labour based on explicit class politics. And there's one final point. A Starmer-led Labour government is the most likely outcome of the next election. Not certain, but likely. A Labour government which in all probability will be on collision course with the trade unions. That period could well determine the future relationship between the party and the unions. And for us, whether in our CLPs or unions, to voluntarily leave the Labour Party and vacate that arena of class conflict would, in my opinion, be a big mistake. So to conclude, the issues we face are complex. How to build the strength of the Labour movement above all, how to give that political expression. And for those of, I'm afraid you rather than me, because I've been expelled, for those who remain in the party, how to operate in what is so often a hostile, toxic environment, and how to link with all those in struggle in the trade unions, the climate change movement against climate change and beyond. There is no place, comrades, for simple answers to these complex questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Food for thought as always, and absolutely no straightforward, no simple low-hanging fruit in terms of ideas, but this is what tonight is all about, to mull over these contributions. We'll return, Graham, to you when we've heard from Alan and Audrey and Tony. But Alan, in the meantime, over to you, comrade.
Great, thanks very much. I love sharing conversations with Graham because, 90% of what Graham has just said, I would endorse. But the twists to it that I want to add, it is to look at this question from the perspective of our own failings. And over the years, over the decades, I just think the arguments that we've had inside the Labour Party is whether Labour is a compromise or a betrayal. And for me, the left has wasted far too much time in arguing the nuances between those two positions. Is Labour, is this the end of the line for Labour? Is it the end? No, I don't think it is. Is the party lost? For sure it is lost. But we are part of the lostness too. And where I just differ from Graham's take on this is that I think we've also taken almost a caricature position at times over class politics, and that we failed to grasp the significant change in capitalism that came with Margaret Thatcher. Up to that point, we were arguing around production capitalism and the role of the trade unions in defending rights in the workplace was the pivotal struggle, because that was where capitalism v socialism was being fought out. Thatcher moved the game on because she'd made this decision or acknowledgement that capitalism had moved into a new era, and it was all about finance capital. Production capital no longer mattered to her, and that's why she oversaw the collapse of large parts of UK productive industry. And we were still fighting the game as though capital hadn't changed. And if you want an example of this today, in terms of all of the struggles that are going on, all of the disputes that we're questioning where Labour is, it almost has gone with barely a mention that one item on the 5 o'clock news today was the report that the private rents have gone up in the last year more than any other recorded year. So that in the middle of this enormous crisis, the cost of living crisis, the climate crisis, the rights, individual and collective rights crisis, capital accumulation in terms of the rewards going to the owners of capital have massively spiraled. That's both in finance capital and property capital. So we're conducting arguments with Labour or with the Labour leadership as though we're still trying to defend yesterday's production capitalism. And my experience and the time when I was the advisor to John McDonnell on climate politics and to Jeremy, was that every time I would come up with a propositional shift in where Labour needed to move to, you could bet your money that within the next hour, the GMB would be on the phone calling for John Mack or Jeremy to sack me, because it didn't fit with their view that their job was to defend the interests of their existing workers in the gas and oil and nuclear sectors. And so these were the big recruitment centres for the election of their leaderships, and they were defending yesterday's production modes, irrespective of how far this was accelerating the race to a climate cliff edge. And we've been really poor at recognising that climate, if we want to survive, climate politics has to be seen as inseparable from class politics, not an add-on extra at the end, but right at the centre of redefining how we live and how we share. And the country isn't short of resources. There are massive resources. It's just that they are completely skewed, perversely skewed, in favour of the ultra-rich who are the owners of capital. And that's where intellectually, I think the left have to be giving a lead. And it wouldn't be that difficult to be pushing that into the agenda inside the Labour Party, because there is no other intellectual lead. What you've got is pragmatic leadership, trying desperately to offer a better yesterday. And we need to be the ones that just say, yesterday's dead. And if we're not careful, tomorrow's dead too. If we don't act in ways that bring different visions about the relocalization of ownership and control and production and distribution. And that is going to be the politics of survival. It will actually be underpinned, if you want to simplify it, will be underpinned by a commitment to an economics that has to deliver annually a 10% reduction in our carbon footprint from now, certainly for the rest of this decade and probably the one that follows. So my question is not, do I expect the Labour leadership to actually pioneer that agenda? I don't, not for one moment. But I do expect the left to be the leaders of that conversation. And we're not at the moment leading that in the way that the peace movement did in the 60s and infiltrated its ideas as well as its personnel into the Labour Party, or the radical localisms that you found in the GLC and in Scotland and in Liverpool and around the country, where radical localism and direct and shorter lines of accountability drove that political agenda. And that's the challenge that faces us. To argue about the Labour as a reform or a betrayal, whether it's dead or alive, is a waste of our own intellectual and physical efforts. We have to be the ones who set the goalposts in a different place. And we defend differently what we have to defend, but we build differently the shape of a different, more localized and accountable democratic structure for the way in which we conduct our lives. And that means in every aspect, whether it's transport, whether it's in housing, whether it's in education, whether it's in health, how we do this in ways that bring capital into direct use for the public and society that can survive, and how we bring politics in to see that that is the only set of questions that now matter. That's my lot.
Thank you, Alan. I think I'm going to hand back to Jackie, and Jackie is now going to introduce Ian and Audrey.
I have to say, I found that a very challenging view, and I'd like to now bring on Ian Hodson. And I just want to remind people who Ian is. Of course, he's the president of the Bakers Union, but he's also very well known for all sorts of what I would call on-the-ground campaigns in terms of the right to food, in terms of low pay. He was a great Corbynite presence within the trades union movement, and actually a great comrade to meet at conference and a great comrade to the oppressed. But before I go and question you about some of the ideas that we have just heard from Alan, can I just ask you, Ian, why did the Bakers Union disaffiliate from the Labour Party?
The reason why we disaffiliated is because our members didn't believe that the Labour Party served the interests of the people that we represent. Our members took part in a survey. They also took part in a conference, and the overwhelming feeling was that, you know, a party that didn't wish to see the implementation of a £15 an hour minimum wage, a party that was woolly around the issue of abolishing 0 hours contracts, and we decided to disaffiliate. We had conducted a survey and we had a conference, and the discussions went on about the aspirations around what Labour represented for us as a trade union. We didn't feel that the Labour Party was serious about workers' rights, and obviously we witnessed the dismissal of Andy MacDonald at conference for supporting the call for £15 an hour. We don't believe that the party is serious in abolishing 0 hours contracts, and while the best policy that was put to the 2021 conference was the employment's right policy, the fact that the architect of that was forced out, you know, was further, like I say, confirmation of the travel direction of the current Labour Party, and I haven't seen anything that changes that position, with the fact that, you know, Sam Tarry was sacked from the front bench for attending a picket line from a trade union that he was previously working for. The fact that Starmer threatened other front benchers with removal from the shadow cabinet if they attended picket lines. The war that he seems to have declared on the GPs in recent days, the undermining of the ability for trade unions to achieve reasonable settlements in the current climate would suggest to me that, you know, the current Labour Party under Starmer's leadership is not serving the interests of working people or trade union members.
Okay, I can't disagree with you there, but my question to follow up on that is, it seems to me that it's very clear that Starmer has said to the shadow cabinet, you don't go on pickets. We're not going to talk about how much we're going to give workers. We are not going to spend any more money than the Tories are going to work on. And they've been barely sort of resisting this issue about trade union legislation. So why do other unions appear to be sort of quietly sitting within the Labour Party? There doesn't seem to be, what I'm saying is, much resistance within the trades union movement to what Starmer's doing. How do you account for that?
I think what the situation is amongst other trade unions is that quite clearly they're, you know, most of them are a lot bigger organisations than we are. They play significant roles inside the Labour Party, and for many of them, you know, what Starmer's doing, you know, suits the trade unions that are affiliated to the Labour Party. Obviously, they see having a voice inside the Labour Party as a means to getting their voices heard. And I understand that, because for the Labour Party, we had an influence on the policies that the Labour Party was making. But quite clearly, we've seen since Starmer got elected that any policy that's been passed at conference, if he doesn't agree with it, he's overturned it. The manifesto of 2017 that attracted so many people into politics has been ditched. The 2019 manifesto that was really not that radical, but offered some solutions to the problems that we're actually seeing in our society, because they have some association with Jeremy Corbyn, have been ditched and been replaced by policies which actually would probably not be in the interests of most of the trade unions that have stayed affiliated. And I think there is a move, certainly amongst grassroots activists in other trade unions, but obviously, you know, the arguments from senior people within trade unions is such that, you know, it's better to be on the inside than on the out. They can influence the party. If they're not there, then of course there is nobody to influence the party. My personal belief, and a lot of our members have said this to me, is that they don't believe that being inside, you know, was a worthwhile use of union money. The best way for us to be heard was to organise on the ground and to work with others to build an opportunity for a political voice outside of Westminster politics. And that's the position that we've chosen to take.
I think that's a very interesting response, Ian. Thank you for that. Can I just ask final question? You have a new leader now in the TUC, don't you?
Don't know that.
Yeah, I don't know much about him. What do you expect from him in terms of relationships with the Labour Party?
Well, I mean, the TUC is supposed to be non-affiliated, but my knowledge of what happens with the TUC is they're very unlikely to rock the boat in relation to its relationship with the Labour Party. They would rather wait for the Labour Party to come over the hill to save us all. I think that's a mistake. I've always thought waiting for politicians to make changes in our interests is not likely to happen. The only change that I've ever seen happen is when we as people get organised and force those changes to happen. I don't think politicians will move onto radical reforming change unless there is an absolute uprising of people's demands for it to happen. So, you know, I don't expect the TUC's relationship with the Labour Party to change in any way. I think, you know, they will make sure that they don't do anything that upsets the leadership of the Labour Party.
Thanks for that, Ian. Now, next, Audrey White from the Liverpool Pensioners Association. Of course, you know, I'm sure Audrey is very well known to most of us. But of course, we have to also remember that her story of resistance and also, you know, resistance to organisations is not just a recent one. I mean, we've all watched that wonderful video of Audrey confronting Starmer in the cafe in Liverpool. But in fact, 1983, you did the same on a picket line, and you did it so successfully that actually your story was made into a film which starred Glenda Jackson. And you've also given the Jewish Chronicle a reason to reach for their checkbooks when they, I think, made quite a few lies about you. So, Audrey, you're coming from another perspective again. I'd like to ask you, should Labour actually be saved?
In my opinion, no. And all we have to do is to look at the role that Labour is playing, even particularly in local government at the moment. That there is absolutely, unlike in the 80s, there was a fight back within the Labour Party. Elements of the left were really taken on, like the Liverpool 47, who had the motto, better to break the law than to break the poor, and actually, you know, did a tremendous, but actually had won real gains for people. And, you know, that's why what Ian was saying before was important. It only ever comes from below, from mass campaigns. I mean, the good thing about my dispute isn't nothing to do with the film being made about it, is that it was groundbreaking. The whole city got behind it, and from that position that we took, and the way we fought it, and the way we raised it with men, you know, white men on picket lines, dockers and car workers, that we actually took those arguments to the movement, and we won in the end gains for women by making sexual harassment, you know, changing the law on sexual harassment. So it's always to do with, you know, grassroots movements. I mean, for instance, the MPA, the Merseyside Pensioners, we've been campaigning for 100 weeks, 100 weeks against the council cuts every Friday at 12:30 in Picton Road. And the massive respect we've got and the massive support we've got from everybody driving up and down that road every Friday is the way you build campaigns. You know, you stand in the weather, you argue with people, you have your leaflets, you do the social media. And, you know, who are we fighting? We're fighting the Labour Party. So if the argument is to try and stay in the Labour Party, to somehow get pie in the sky at some future date, what you do is you have to compromise yourself every single moment you're in that party. Well, I've never done that. I never compromised anything when the girls were sexually harassed in my store. You know, I didn't. I was offered different jobs. I could have took the job somewhere else. I was offered money, could have walked away. You don't compromise. You just don't. Same with the Jewish Chronicle. You actually take them on you, which is what we should have done with you, Jackie. We should have faced fact. We should have attacked straight away.
I agree. So, Audrey, given that many of us can't be part of the Liverpool Pensioners Association, we're talking to people who are all across this country, who are in all sorts of situations. You're saying the Labour Party is finished. Where do activists go? How should socialists now be organising for change?
Well, where they are, there's absolutely no dearth of places to find political action. And I think what we've got to say is that there's a few things that's happened the last couple of years. And, you know, one of them is that the growth of put it this way, the death of the statement that Thatcher tried to say the community was dead. And if we thank COVID for one thing, that they nailed that lie, that under COVID, people started to recognise the importance of cleaners and nurses and doctors and railway workers and the postie coming along and the delivery man and ordinary workers. And we all leaned on each other. And the big mistake that the Tories made was recognising that and clapping for nurses. And it's meant that most people now do look to the neighbours, do look to local issues, do look to the normal practical things that people need to survive. And it's actually brought community alive. And it was already, in a sense, through the Corbyn years that we started to engage with each other. But that really nailed it for people who weren't in politics. So if you speak to people locally, you know, they've got no time for Labour. Just like up in Scotland, when everybody's, you know, you don't need to look very far. You don't need to look at Scotland. You have to look at the red line, as they call it, you know, where all the seats were. Labour is finished because they're bankrupt of ideas, because we won the argument, and that we have now this tremendous, fantastic uprising. I mean, it's unrest. This is unrest that we're experiencing now. Right across, you know, working class, middle class people. And, you know, there's a lot more to teachers, the FBU, we had the FBU speaking to us only the other day. We didn't, in Liverpool, we didn't even have any cover, do you know, over the Christmas period. You know, a lot of this stuff will get out there and we'll end up fighting. So people know where to go to fight. There's every opportunity to oppose what's going on. But what we don't have is a political voice.
Okay.
And can I just say, I am so passionate about the way forward now. I've been talking to Ken. Me and Ken have had quite a few before we did that recording for not the Andrew Marr show. We were talking about, is the reality, is Jeremy Corbyn going to come up with the start of a party? Are the unions going to start up with a party? There's no sign that anybody, the TUC are absolutely useless. Where are we going to go? Where are we going to go? We have to do it ourselves, like we always do. And I'll tell you what's going to happen. There'll be some people in the Labour Party that you'll think are okay, and you'll never stand against them. There will be. There's some good ones. I'm not saying every member of the PLP, they're all cowards, gonna say, all cowards. But I wouldn't be saying we should stand against them, the better ones. But I think we've got to, from every single campaign that we've got, every campaign that we've got off the ground, to disabled groups, to NHS, to climate change, to every subject you can think of, we've had to really do have the best of people. I've always said, likes of our local hospital, the Women's Hospital, there's women who've been campaigning for 7 years. They've read every document. They go to all the CCGs. These are the people who are knowledgeable, not the MPs and all the rest of it. These campaigners will be the best MPs and will really be committed to the radical change, because they've done it for nothing. They've done it for years because they're knowledgeable, because they know there's only one way forward. And we've got to do that. It's got to be a mixture of independence. And it's the only way we'll survive. If we don't do it, we are finished.
Thank you, Audrey. I'm just going to give the last word to Ian. Where do we go from here? Short and sweet, Ian. Where do socialists go?
I mean, that's a difficult question, because obviously people's affiliation to the Labour Party is a very difficult one for them not to want to go and support the Labour Party in a general election. My personal belief is that what we have to do is create the opportunity for people to have the ability to exercise their democratic right to vote and support people who actually they believe in, rather than having to vote for somebody that will not act in their best interest. And I think it's important that activists actually start working on the idea that we do have to create a new opportunity and a new party. Obviously in Liverpool, you've got the Liverpool Independents, you've got PAL, which is forming, and we've got lots of little breakout parties like the Breakthrough Party, and they might not be the answer, but I think that there is so many people that are desperate for change, that there is an awful lot of people that's got an awful lot of experience, and now is the time for everybody to come together and start working out an alternative. Otherwise, the right and the far right will be our future, and it's up to us on the left to come together to put forward a real alternative with a radical programme that builds a future that we can all play a part in. Is that quick enough?
Ian and Audrey, I think that was fabulous. Mike, I think you've got some ideas to take back to Graham and Alan, haven't you?
I do indeed. And listen, fantastic contributions from Ian and Audrey, but to be candid, they are difficult contributions for socialists who remain in the Labour Party or who have invest hope or expectations in the Labour Party. Ian said quite clearly and very candidly that from his point of view, the current political trajectory of the Labour Party is incompatible with the interests of his members. For Audrey, with long experience campaigning in the Labour Party, the unrest, as she rightly described it, which is happening throughout the trade union movement, but also in community campaigns, anti-fascist, anti-racist, and the climate movement, is not something that is going to reflect in the Labour Party. So difficult questions for socialists. Graham, for you, first of all, and Alan, please feel free to come in, although I do have some particular questions, if you don't mind, for you as well, Alan. What, Graham, if any, what is the role of socialists in the Labour Party still? As you said, there are tens of thousands who remain there. There are many who would like to still be involved but have been expelled. Is there a meaningful role for socialists in the party, and how do they link up with people who remain outside the Labour Party, either by choice or as a consequence of being expelled?
Well, thanks for that easy question, Mike. Let me firstly say, before I say anything, just how much I appreciate the contributions and the comradeship of Ian and Audrey, as well as, of course, Alan. And I've got more in common with them than any of those who support Starmer and those who are with Starmer in attacking the left. These are my real comrades. And when I'm fit enough to get back on the picket lines, it will be comrades like them that'll be with me. And I have to say, from the local picket lines from where I am, I've got to be honest, there's hardly any Labour Party people there, although I must say the majority were Labour Party members 2 years ago. So what's our role? What's your role, rather? I keep forgetting after 53 years and then being expelled, I forget I'm not a member of the party. Well, the one thing it isn't is to, in the words that Audrey was talking about and Ian, it's not to compromise, it's not to be silent, it's not to keep our heads down, it is to speak truth to power. It is to link up and openly support trade unions and trade unionists in struggle. It is to tell the truth about the climate crisis we face, and to remind everybody that there is no socialism on a dead planet. That's the first thing we do. We link up with other comrades in the party to the extent we can. Free speech, democratic decision-making are daily being reduced. There's still avenues. We still get the odd resolutions at conference. It's not the be-all and end-all, but there's still a role there. But the key role is to prepare, in my opinion, for tomorrow. And I want to come back to the point that I raised to begin with, because I saw in chat my old comrade Tony Greenstein, who said this is different from previous Labour governments. And it's the point I made, actually. I think he may have thought he was disagreeing with me, but he was actually agreeing with me, that there is very little scope now for the next Labour government under Starmer to carry out reforms, to have public expenditure increases in certain areas like Blair did. And I think that this is going to create a collision with the trade unions. And our task is to be speaking, to be at that intersection of the party and the unions, because I also think, actually, the game is probably up. I mean, it's a bit much to say after 122 years of history, the Labour Party is finished, and simply to be able to say, well, there is to proclaim a new party. We need a new party, but it's more to having a new party than proclaiming it, it's building it. And I think that we've got to try to develop those links between all of the sections of the population, the working class that is fighting back, that is resisting. You know, the old Bible says, in the beginning is the word. Well, I don't agree with the Bible. In the beginning is the deed. And the fight back, the actual material fight back, is the precondition, in my opinion, for building a new party. And as we will be seeing in future discussions, I hope in Red Line, the revolutionary ideas that many of us espouse will only get a hearing when the working class and the movement is feeling strong and needs our ideas. So our task is to tell the truth, to say what is happening to the climate, to the economy, and to do what Alan actually said, to recognise that now that climate politics is inseparable from class politics, and we need to redefine our programmes, the way we must live, so that it becomes relevant. And in fact, the point, although we can, the last word I want to say on this for the moment is this: we get almost overcome by the power of the right wing in crushing us in the party, but they have feet of clay. What they have to say is utterly irrelevant to the problems that we and the whole of humanity face. And the bankruptcy of Starmer and his people and his gang will be clear from day one. And our task is to build a future out of the ashes of that government. And I may not be here to prove this one way or the other, but the Starmer government may well be the last Labour government we will ever have, because we will need to build something which replaces Labour, but it's a question of timing. And I think that the Labour Party and the trade unions as is a key part of what we're trying to build. So my difference with comrades is one of timing. It's not one of principle. It's not even one of strategy. It's just, I mean, once, Audrey, I don't want to misquote you, but I think you once accepted that we fight where we are. And that's a really good place. I would like to fight in the Labour Party. I can't. It's not going to, doesn't mean to say I'm going to shut up, because I won't. So I hope that begins to answer some of the questions.
Thank you, Graham. And the meeting that Comrade Bash paraphrases scripture, this is a special meeting, Alan, a similar but slightly different question to you. You've had the vantage point, or had the vantage point over many years of the PLP, and its kind of historical, as we know, disconnect from the wider movement. There's been a wee kind of significant debate in the chat box there about whether Starmer and the current dispensation is qualitatively different from previous regimes. From your point of view, is there something different qualitatively, historically, about where the Labour Party is right now compared to previous right-wing regimes who also did not approach the left in a remotely comradely way? Are we in somewhere different that is a tipping point for socialists in the Labour Party?
I think the Labour Party, in parliamentary terms, has gone through a whole series of phases where the left have been anything but welcome. And this is just one of those phases. But I think Graham's right in saying that as things stand, there is a very clear focus, obsession, if you like, with there not being a repeat of the unleashing of forces that brought Jeremy Corbyn into the leadership and hundreds of thousands of people into the party to create an excitement about change that this sort of centrist Labour just found absolutely terrifying. So that there is a real focus now on not allowing that to happen. But to put that into the context of what does it mean to us, I just was smiling there, Mike, because I used to get pulled into the whip's office pretty much on a weekly basis for one or other of the votes against the whip. And one of the accusations they threw at me was to say, look, you're out of line with the whip and you're out of line with the manifesto. And I'd say, no, absolutely not. I'm never out of line with the manifesto. I'm always just in line early for the next manifesto. And that's what I think the left has to do. That is our responsibility now, to be in line with the next manifesto and what it ought to be saying. Because I think Labour will win the next election, and that's where its problems are going to begin, because it is not but under the laws of physics, it is not possible to repair the system that we have. Its breaking down is irretrievable. The question is, do we have the ability to offer a vision of something that is both survivable and sustainable that needs to follow? And my conviction is that that's what the left has always represented. I've only ever been in the Labour Party and always tried to occupy this space that is not out of line, but ahead of the game. That is the challenge facing us. And I think we have to respond to it in ways that Audrey described in terms of, the work of the pensioners movements in Liverpool. I just feel really blessed that, that's my homeland, really. But I remember that, Liverpool was also the home of, Bessie Braddock and the Marnes, which was anything other than an open and inclusive and non-manipulative centralist Labour administration. So, the radical voices that came out of radical localism came out despite the Braddocks and the Marns. And that's been the same in every part of locality-based politics that ran throughout the country. And it was the same with the way that the peace movements emerged. And it's the same now if we grasp it in what the climate change or the environment and local accountability movements are calling out for, which is for us to both identify with those movements, to provide the glue that links some of those movements together, and for those of us who are inside the Labour Party, to continue to hold the doors open wherever we can, because these are the only get out of jail cards that the Labour Party can hope to find. It doesn't want to find them at the moment. It doesn't think it needs to find them. But following the next election, it bloody well will do.
Alan, Graham, just to follow up on that, we know that the Corbyn moment, that project was catalysed and given impetus specifically by movements outside the party, who came into the party, of course, and made use of the existing structures of the left that remained active and remained committed to the party. You mentioned, Alan, that of course Starmer's project in turn is to ensure that that does not happen again, and those voices, that energy that can come from outside and inside the party and still sees the party as a vehicle for its ideas and the realisation of its politics. If, as Graham describes, under a Labour government, there is a collision with the trade union movement, and of course the kind of animated campaigning that Audrey describes is still going on, can Starmer stop that intervening in the Labour Party? I mean, will that forevermore, which is what some people are arguing, never again have an impact at all inside the Labour Party? Or is the Labour Party still potentially a vehicle to express the views that are being campaigned for and organised for outside of the Labour Party?
Well, I think for me, Starmer's current position is a bit like Labour in Scotland under Blair. It was New Labour that killed Scottish Labour. And, if you like, the SNP for me was successful just because they pinched all Labour's clothing and they stood for things that traditionally Labour had stood for and fought for. And New Labour thought it just didn't have to. Look, they've got in on a huge mandate. Who gives a stuff? And the answer was, in a very short space of time, the voters gave us stuff and they walked away. Now, Starmer, I say, Starmer will win the next election for Labour, but he'll win it on the basis that everything else is just falling apart. And Starmer will have sole ownership of the vehicle of governments, but it'll turn out to be a reliant Robin. And, faced with that choice, people will say, who wants to buy a bloody reliant Robin? No one in their right mind. Actually, we want other forms of transport that would include us all and not be falling apart at the seams. That's where we've got to be positioned, not to be the whingers, the fringes of things, but we've got to be there offering models of the how of doing things differently. And there are lots of examples. Let me throw in a couple of ones. I've taken groups of Labour MPs across to different parts of Europe looking at different schemes. In Denmark, they took energy into social ownership in 1973, 74. It is, you can't sell it for profit. It's redefined as a service, not as a market. And it's the whole energy sector is owned municipally by the three major cities, or as a series of cooperatives between districts, 79 of them in different parts of the country. And it's a completely different model of socialized ownership of energy, because energy is a key to their survival. It's also the most stable grid in Europe, and it's also, actually owns most of the UK offshore wind turbines are bloody owned by Denmark. this socialized ownership model, which includes people, includes local communities, is massively popular. And there are huge parts where they have a right in big chunks of Europe and even in the bloody United States to what is called a right of local supply, where communities that generate their own electricity from renewable sources can actually sell it to each other at prices closer to wholesale than retail prices. And people love it. People love it. Now, we're not offered that because the old centralized model that, Whitehall and parliamentary thinking has been based on has either been giving control to corporates at a privatized corporate level or holding it centralized in the hands of the state. And actually, we're almost as bad as each other. And the better models of democratic, socially and locally accountable infrastructures of production, distribution, and exchange, those are the models of socialism and environmentalism that we've got to re-articulate, and we've got to connect them into the expectations, the dreams of all these kids who are in the climate movements now, who are looking for a political home and can't find one, not organizationally, but intellectually. That's what the left has to step up and fill that space.
Thanks, Alan. Graham, the same question to you. Has the drawbridge been drawn up for the last time? Are the doors locked in the Labour Party to those external movements?
Well, has it been finally locked? Well, I don't know, Mike. What I always quote, and I'm sorry everyone's probably heard me say this, Gramsci, who said the old world is dying, the new world is waiting to be born, now is the time of monsters. Now, it's exactly opposite for us. I agree with Alan when he says that we've got to build the politics of tomorrow, which is, i.e., relevant to the needs of the whole of humanity. Socialized production, socialized control of economy, socialized power, linking up our communities on a local, national, global scale. Because let's be clear, we both need local initiatives, but to save the planet, we need planning on a global scale as well. And it's got to be combining the both. Now, the vehicle for that, well, I remember once we had a red line program where a comrade said, class struggle will always find its expression in the Labour Party. Now, that seems a bit of a historical absolute to me. Class struggle will always find its expression, but whether it finds it in the Labour Party depends on the extent to which the current leadership of the Labour Party is capable of destroying it. And one thing was absolutely clear, that the leadership of the Labour Party, representing the bourgeoisie in this country, the establishment faction, fears our movement more than it does the Tories, more than it does Capital. When it came to the crunch, they preferred, we knew this in 2017, they preferred a Tory victory to a Labour victory. So I'm not going to come up with historical absolutes and say the Labour Party cannot be saved. I think that the odds are very much against us. I think that our task, therefore, is to do what we seem to be agreeing. Build from the movement, building the movement of resistance, linking it up and preparing for the time when a collision is likely between the Labour Party and the trade unions, which could, in these historical material conditions, actually create a schism between the party and the unions, which could redefine that relationship. I'm not saying it's going to happen, by the way. Someone may come on a program in 10 years' time, quote me and say, you said it was going to happen, it hasn't happened. Who knows? I mean, I don't think the Labour Party for a moment is dead. The question is whether it's of any use, whether it can be utilised by our movement. I think the odds are against us, but it's no good just proclaiming new parties because, look, I've been around now for political activity for 55 years. I can count almost in 3 figures the number of new parties that have been set up. And once or twice you do get electoral victories, as we know, against the main parties, but they're few and far between. And I think we've got to have more ambition than just thinking we can stand candidates that get 200, 300, 400 votes and that's our job done. I mean, it may, in certain areas where there is a real local base for opposition, it could begin to work. But generally, it won't. I mean, look, let me give you an example. People are saying Corbyn should set up a new party and he should stand against Labour. I totally agree with the second. Let me make it clear. Corbyn should stand against Labour as an independent Labour and he would probably win. Who knows? I think he would win. But if he actually tied himself, say, to 30, 40 other candidates, Jeremy would win, the 30 or 40 other candidates would get a couple of 100 votes each. So that's not, let's not misunderstand the period we're in. We're in a period of transition. We've got to build our forces preparing for tomorrow. And that, I know the criticism of that. It's always jam tomorrow and all of this. But I'm not saying really that. I'm saying we fight now and we tell the truth. No compromise. We don't stop speaking. I mean, to be honest, in 53 years in the party, I never compromised. I never achieved much, on the other hand, but I didn't compromise. And we put our politics forward. If we get thrown out, we get thrown out.
Okay.
And that's what comrades are doing. So
Thank you.
I don't think there's an easy answer. Sorry,
No,
I'm going on too much.
no easy answers, no easy answers. And Alan, Graham, thank you, comrades, and I'll hand back to Jackie.
Yeah, thank you. And just one more word, one last sentence from Ian and Audrey, please, on where you see us going, what you think of the conversation, anything like that. Audrey.
Well, I think what we can't afford now is a defeat. And it's just more than a sentence, but we can't afford as a movement now a defeat in terms of the trade union action that's been taken out. And I think that's what, it was a question you put to Ian earlier on about, the leadership of the unions, about disaffiliating from the Labour Party. And I think and I've spoken to people about their leaders and what they're saying, senior people in the unions, there's a real fear of losing any of the new disputes that are going on. And I think, that's very intimidating when you've got the power of these fantastic results of 86% turnout and 80% in favour of strike action. And it's going on for weeks and months and so on. What happens next? And we as a movement can't afford any defeats, because if we have any, it will really set us back. We need for the working class to experience its strength and its power. And the more of that we have, and that everyone's learning on picket lines, you learn more on a picket line than any of these programs. You learn more by, reading a book or anything. You learn so much about class solidarity, you talk politics, the mind's focused, and that's happening in families all around the country. That's why when Graham's saying that, I think we have to realise that the big item now is talking about strikes and talking about a way forward. And it's not just us politicos now, it's people who haven't been there, thought of it and all the rest of it. And the criminality of the Labour Party is known by everyone. I'll finish now. And it is right. You do fight where you stand. That's what I did say, Graham. You're dead right. We fight where we stand. So, but don't compromise yourself. And I think a lot of people have and still are. And that's why they're cowards in the Labour Party. But we need victories now. That's what we need.
Thank you. Ian.
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't disagree with anything that Audrey said, or and most of the comments tonight. I mean, this weekend I'm going to something called the Indie Labour Fest, which is celebrating 130 years since the founding of the Labour Party, where there's going to be discussion about the future of what socialism is all about. But I mean, it's great to come on programs like this, and it's great to see programs where we talk about these issues. But one of the things that I'm always frustrated about is we talk about the left and what the left, is, and how we should academically consider that. What we never do is talk about what it is that it changes people's lives. It creates a society that enables people to grow, to be able to make sure that their families are better going forward and stronger. We create stuff like the NHS. We believe in stuff like full employment, where people are able to get properly paid, contracted work, where people's lives are enhanced because they have decent homes, where we actually set an agenda that improves the society that we live in, that we don't use scapegoats like, we've got to come out of Europe because it's all these immigrants coming over here, and now because your life is still crap, it's all those people coming, no, it's 40 people coming over on a dinghy that's making your life hard, and using scapegoats. We have to explain what it is we are and what it is we mean to people. I think that's the key for me for building a better society and getting people back engaged in politics. Because I think what people are probably get lost on is when we talk about, the academia around, what is the left and how the left thrives. What people want to hear is what we want to see as a future for our country, what we want the society to look like, how we address the issues that we face, how we build a country that's based on sustainable employment, invest in manufacturing and rebuilding our infrastructure around getting proper jobs in manufacturing, creating things again, building cars, using our steel, building homes, making furniture, building ships, all of those things that would keep people, properly employed. And I think that's what people want to hear from us as people on the left or socialists. I think that's what they want to hear, that vision of a society that they would live in, if we got the opportunity to have power.
That's great. And that's lovely. Thank you. Wonderful discussion for tonight. And now we're going to actually move on to what's the first of one of our regular features. And it's actually called Our History or Theirs.
Thank you, Jackie. And comrades, let me just share my screen with you and illustrate this picture, lovely picture of the founder of the Labour Party, Keir Hardie. Hardie, of course, comrades, is a very, very contrasting and deeply different figure to his namesake. Is Keir Starmer's family named him after Keir Hardie, but I just wanted to tease out in this very, very brief moment in the first part, as Jackie says, of Our History and Theirs, to contrast Keir Hardie with his namesake. The key thing about Keir Hardie, and he's not an unflawed figure, we're all human beings, and Keir Hardie was no different. And to a degree, he was a creature of his times. But what was absolutely key about this principled figure who came from grinding poverty in Fife, in Kirkcaldy in Fife, and who worked down the mines from a very young age and had very, very difficult experiences as a child, working in dangerous, dark and grimy circumstances, was that he understood, and over time he understood, that the working class can only be represented by an independent political vehicle. Initially, he was close to the Liberal Party, if not a member, as you will remember, comrades, but on the basis of his experiences working with the Liberals and seeing to what extent they were loyal and invested in the establishment and invested in the interests of employers and the ruling class, he began to understand that only an independent party of Labour could meaningfully be a vehicle for the kind of politics that he grew towards, socialist politics, throughout his life. And the last contrast, before I hand back to Jackie, Starmer is very, very much, as we know, a creature of the establishment from his previous legal career, pardon me, to his current place within the House of Commons. He is a parliamentarian to the marrow of his soul. What is fascinating and deeply admirable about Hardie is that he saw the House of Commons as a place where he was obliged to have to go. And he famously, like an original punk rocker, wore exactly what he liked to the House of Commons, did not abide by the social norms and the etiquette and the protocols, of the parliamentarians, and he saw Parliament at best as a vehicle for socialist politics, but indivisible from the struggles that took place outside of Parliament, and which was, as I say, a place not convenient to socialists, but a place which I guess you had to put a very large peg on your nose to enter as a socialist out of necessity. And I think you've got a very sharp contrast, Jackie.
The wonderful thing about why we're doing this on this week is that actually this is the week, the first week in January that Keir Hardie actually founded the LRC, the Labour Representation Committee, which was in fact, if you like, the start of the Labour Party itself. Now, I contacted Keir Starmer and I did ask him to be interviewed by us about his contribution as a Keir and as a leader of the Labour Party. Now, he said, unfortunately, he couldn't be with us because if he was, he'd have to exclude and suspend and himself. So he couldn't do that. But luckily, he has sent us a video that we can watch.
Can you guarantee that under your leadership, the 2019 Labour commitments to nationalise water, energy, rail, the Royal Mail, they'll all be in Labour's next election manifesto?
I've made that commitment.
Those 4 industries will be in the Labour manifesto for nationalisation come 2024.
They will.
So is it a pledge that these industries will be in your manifesto for nationalisation?
Yes, it is.
I didn't make a commitment to nationalisation. I never made a commitment to nationalisation.
I've made that commitment.
I never made a commitment to nationalisation.
I've made that commitment.
Why then doesn't the Labour left trust you?
Well,
And there you have it, our Keir and their Keir. I know which Keir I would like to have, but we're coming to the end now of the programme. I'd like to really thank everybody who's taken part. It's been a hard programme to put on. And actually, it's been really great having Ian and Audrey raise that issue of theory or practice, because that's always been something of a discussion within the left and with activists. And of course, Red Line hasn't been exempt to that. Now, one thing that we always said on Red Line TV is that after we'd been on for a while, we'd review why we're here and what we're doing. And given what has been happening, we think this is a very good line to do it, good time to do it. Now, in Red Line TV, some of us are Marxists, some of us are not Marxists. We don't see being a Marxist as a prerequisite to what we do. But the first thing that we did commit to when we started Red Line TV was that conflicts would be resolved through debate. And in that tradition, our next programme in 2 weeks' time, we've invited Chris Knight and Tina Berkman to discuss the relation between theory and activism. But of course, we're doing it like Red Line, so there'll be much more than that. And we're also going to open that out for a discussion from you, from the audience, to see where you would like Red Line to go. But to end the show tonight, we're going to leave you with some totally uplifting words and music from people who are practicing this on the grounds, on the picket lines. So thank you to the wonderful workers of London Transport who are not just manning our buses and keeping us safe on our trains, but they're also manning our activism and womaning it as well. Thank you and good night.
I'm
Big up all the work I go ahead London, but this a one ya bill for me camera well dance. Male and female, black and white man, who no push that tune ya make you reach number 1. 12s, you have to know the road code, cause Oxford Circus are busy roads. Mirror signal when we touch Barry Road, otherwise we dey in at the office for sure. 45s, yes me not tell no lie, when we say 35 you know a punching time. But when the bus drop in a patrol, you feel like it a transform me not up to much prime. P5 have a short running time, passengers step on them sit down same time, cause them know from Ellie to Patmore Estate. The bus a just swing from left to right. Yes, the 185 flew Kiggy, the best drive. 3, 4, 5 like a gun a bad bus. From Peckham to Brixton, you wanna feel safe when you reach a South Kensington. Me say big up all the work I go ahead London, but this a one ya bill for me camera well dance. Male and female, black and white man, who no push that tune ya make you reach number 1. Big up all the work I go ahead London, but this a one ya bill for me camera well dance. Male and female, black and white man, who no push that tune ya make you reach